Hi, this is session 12 of Apigee Edge course for beginners. In this session, we will see in action how to verify access token along with scope with an example. If you are new to our channel, can I ask you a favor? Please subscribe our channel so that it would help me to come up with more videos. Alright, in our previous video session, we have discussed how to associate scope with an access token when generating access token. In case if you haven't watched our previous session, I would strongly recommend you to watch before proceeding with this video session because you need to know how to generate access token with scope first. Then only you'll be able to understand how to verify access token with scope. Okay, in this demo, we will see how to allow access to endpoints based on scope along with access token. Let's consider that we would like to allow access to this endpoint only when the request is coming from the user whose scope is guessed. Similarly, we would like to allow access to this endpoint only when the request is coming from the user whose scope is customer. Likewise, we would like to allow access to this endpoint only when the request is coming from the user whose scope is admin. So how can we do that? Let's see that in action. Let's flip to Google Chrome browser and log in into Apigee Edge UI and click API proxies under develop menu. So which would give us all the available API proxies which we have created. So you could see API proxy demo is the API proxy which we have been using in our course so far. So let's use the same API proxy in this example as well. Let's navigate to develop tab and OAuth 2 proxy endpoint is the proxy endpoint which we use to generate access tokens. And if you could see, generate access token flow is the flow which we use to generate access token using client credentials grant type along with scope. So let's use the same in this example as well. So let's go and request for access tokens using client credentials grant type and see whether we get the access token from Edge. So this is the endpoint. Let's try to generate access token with the scope guessed. Here we go. We are able to generate access token with client credentials grant type and also with scope guessed. So now we'll have to allow the request to this endpoint only when the access token is coming from the guest scope. So how can we do that? We can do that using verify access token policy. So now we'll try to invoke these endpoints without providing any checks and let's see what we get. So let's try to invoke this endpoint first. Navigate to Postman. Let's give this request. So in order to get the response from this endpoint, we'll have to provide the authorization header. So let's provide authorization and we'll have to provide the base64 encoded value of client ID and client secret here. So let's copy it from the previous request. Let's copy and provide it here and let's click send. Let's see what we get from Edge. So it is unauthorized. So why we get this response? Let's go and see why we are getting that. So if you could see, the default proxy endpoint is the one which we are trying to invoke now. So here we have two steps, two policies attached to this free flow of our default proxy endpoints. So here, if result is false or result is empty string or result is null, then we'll get this policy invoked, and we'll have the response back to the client application. That is the reason why we get this response now. So in this example, we don't need these two steps. So let's get rid of these two steps. Again, we have implemented this in our earlier sessions. So in this example, we don't need these two steps attached to our free flow. So let's get rid of these two steps and save these changes as a new revision. So new revision 10 is saved, and let's deploy it in the test environment. So let's deploy. It's taking a while to deploy it. Alright, it is saved and deployed it on the test environment. Now let's go ahead and give the request again, and let's see what we get from Edge. Here we go. We are getting the response successfully from the Edge. Similarly, let's try to get the response for other endpoints too, which is /xml/json. So let's try to get the response for XML. Oops, let's copy it. So we are getting the same response for these two endpoints. Why is that? So let's navigate and see why we are getting the same response for two different endpoints. So this default proxy endpoints uses default target endpoint. So let's navigate to our target endpoint, and here if you could see, this is the target endpoint. Whatever request we make, eventually this will get invoked. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove /user from it. I'm going to provide only the base domain, and the subsequent endpoints we can provide it from the request. So let's save these changes. The reason for telling this is, if you could try to invoke this endpoint with /user, so this is an endpoint, so it gives hello guest. And if you try to invoke JSON, so it will give JSON response. The same response we would like to get it via Apigee Edge. So with these changes, let's deploy it. So yeah, revision 10 is saved and deployed it. Now let's try to invoke the endpoint, and let's see what we get from Edge. Here we go. We're getting the respective XML response from it. And also we'll try to get for JSON and see whether we're getting the respective responses. As expected, we are getting JSON response for JSON endpoints. So now we are getting response for all these three endpoints without passing access token or scope. That is because we do not have any security checks in our flows. That is the reason why we are able to invoke this backend API services, and we are able to get the response back to the client application. Now we want to, you know, add some security checks. We would like to allow access to this endpoint only when the user passes access token whose scope is guessed. Similarly for these two endpoints. So let's go ahead and see how can we achieve that. So as we know, we can verify our access token using verify access token operation in the OAuth 2 policy. So let's go and add that policy. Let's click plus icon in the policy section and look for OAuth v2.0 policy. and let's add this policy. So I'm going to name this policy as OAuth v2 verify access token guest scope. So we are going to use this policy to verify access token for the scope guest. So let's add this, and once you click add, this will add the policy with default properties populated. So let's get rid of the unnecessary elements from here, and even this element is not required here, and tokens element as well. So here operation, if you could see, the operation value is specified as verify access token. So what it will do is, when you pass access token from the request, it will verify whether the access token is valid or not. Along with that, we would also try to verify its scope. So how would we verify it? We can do that by scope element added to it. So let's add that scope element added to this policy. So in this policy, we would like to verify access token for the scope guest. So we will have to provide the value as guest here. So let me provide guest. Similarly, let's also add the verify access token policies for other two scopes, that is admin and customer. So let's add another policy, look for OAuth 2 policy here, and this I'm going to name it as OAuth v2 verify access token admin scope. So this policy we are going to use to verify access token for the scope admin. So let's add this. Similarly, let's get rid of the unnecessary properties or elements from the policy. So this policy we would like to verify for the scope admin. So let's add the scope value as admin. Likewise, we'll have to do for one more scope. Let's add one more OAuth v2 policy. I'm going to name this as OAuth v2 verify access token customer scope. So we are going to use this policy to verify access token for the scope customer. So let's add this policy and get rid of the unnecessary elements from the policy. So this one we are going to use it for customer scope. So let's provide the scope value as customer in this policy. So now we have added the policies to verify access token along with the scope. Now we'll have to attach these policies in our flow in order to validate it. So how can we do that? As we know, we'll have to attach these policies in our flow. So default is the proxy endpoint which we use. So in the free flow, let's add these policies which we have created now. So in the request section, let's go ahead and add those three policies which we have created now. So inside step, in the name tag, let's specify the name of the policy. Let's copy the name of the policy. So this is for admin. Please note that we'll have to provide the name of the policy, not the display name. Since I have provided the same value for name and display name fields, I'm copying it from here. But keep in mind that whenever you attach a policy to a flow, you will have to provide the name of the policy, not the display name of the policy. All right, let's navigate to our flow and add attach our policy here. So similarly, we would need two more steps to attach other two policies. So let's copy the policy name and provide it here. Also, let's copy the name of the policy for verifying access token with scope guest and provide it here. Now, with these changes, let's save this. Now, let's try to generate access token and try to invoke that endpoint by providing the access token, and let's see what we get. So here I'm going to generate access token with the scope guest. So I have got the access token with the scope guest, and I'm going to pass this access token as a bearer token. So yeah, now we'll have to provide a token as bearer since our token type is bearer. So here, if you many of you may have doubts. So earlier we have provided the base64 encoded value of client ID and client secret ID, and we were able to invoke the endpoints and were able to get the responses back. Now, why we have to provide access token? That is because earlier we were not having any sort of security checks, and by default, whenever we try to access any endpoints within the Apigee Edge, we have to provide the client ID and client secret ID with base64 encoded, or we can provide it in the query param as client ID and client secret ID, client ID and client secret key. So now, since we have included these security checks to verify access token, we will have to pass access token in order to invoke our endpoint. So that is the reason why we pass access token now. So with these changes, let's try to request it and see what we get from Edge. It says required scopes. So even though I'm providing the access token for the scope guest, it says required scopes. Why is that? Let's see. The reason is first step, it checks verify access token for admin scope. So in this step itself, it will get failed since the access token is coming from the guest scope, not from admin scope. So that is the reason why it will get failed here itself. So just to confirm that, let's trace our session and see whether it is getting failed at first check itself. So let's start our trace session, and now let's give the request. Now we should have our request monitored within the trace session. And here, if you could see the status of this policy, execution error. So the reason for failing this policy is we are providing access token of guest scope, and here we are checking for admin scope. So since the scope is mismatching, the policy is getting failed. So how can we overcome this? So we'll have to execute this on a condition basis. As we discussed, we'll have to, you know, allow the endpoint to admin only when the endpoint is this one when the user tries to invoke this endpoint. So let's see that in action. So we'll have to execute this on a condition basis. So let's add condition tag, and here we'll have to provide the path. Based on path, we'll have to. So for admin, if the path matches slash JSON, then we will have to verify access token and its scope, whether it is coming from the admin user whose scope, I mean, whether the access, whether the request is coming from the user whose scope is admin. So let's see that. How can we add that condition here? So the syntax for that is this one: proxy dot sub path suffix matches path slash JSON. If path matches slash JSON, then we will have to verify access token for the scope admin. Also, we can specify the verb of it. So verb we can check like request.verb. That has to be the get verb. So let's specify that. Similarly, we'll have to specify for other two endpoints as well. So let's copy this condition element completely and do the changes that we need. Let's paste here as well. And this is customer scope. For customer scope, we would need slash XML. If the path matches slash XML, then we'll have to verify access token for customer scope. So let's provide slash XML here. Yeah, let's provide slash XML here. And for guest scope, it is slash user. So let's provide slash user. All right, with these changes, let's save our revision and deploy it in test environment. All right, new revision is saved and it is deployed to test. Now let's try to invoke it. Now we are trying to invoke slash JSON. So slash JSON is for admin scope. So this access token is we have generated for guest. Now with the guest access token, we are trying to invoke this JSON endpoint. Let's see what we get. Here we go. It says required scopes because we are trying to invoke the endpoint. To this, we do not have access. That is the guest guest user do not have access to access this endpoint. That is the reason why we are getting this error. So on the other hand, if I try to invoke the URL which is available for guest scope, then we should be able to invoke the endpoint without any error. So what is the guest endpoint? The guest endpoint is slash user. Let's try to invoke slash user endpoint and let's see whether we are able to get the response successfully from the edge. Let's give the request and see. Here we go. We are getting the response as hello guest. On the other hand, if we try to invoke other two endpoints, XML or JSON, we will not be able to invoke it. Let's try to provide JSON. We should be getting error. Here we go. Since the scope is not matching, or access token doesn't have, or access token doesn't associated with the scope, that will not allow the access to these endpoints. So if we try to, you know, access this endpoint, then we would need access token, which is associated to admin scope. So let's see that. So let's try to generate access token for admin scope. Let's give admin scope and generate access token. And here we have got access token for admin. And let's try to invoke the endpoint with admin scope, and let's see whether we are able to get the response successfully from the edge. Here we go. We are able to get the response. On the other hand, for if you try to consume the endpoint of customer, then we should not be able to get, or we should not be able to consume the API successfully. So let's see that in action. I'm going to invoke /XML endpoint with admin access token, or with the access token which is associated to admin scope. So let's see whether we are getting. Here we go. It says required scopes. On the other hand, this endpoint belongs to the customer scope. Let's try to access it with the customer access token, or the access token which is associated to customer scope. So let's try to generate access token for the scope customer and get the access token. Let's try to invoke this endpoint with this access token which we have created, and let's see whether we are able to get the response successfully. Here we go. We are able to get it successfully. So this is how we can verify access token with scope. In our next video session, we will see how can we allow access to all these three endpoints when the request is coming from the user whose scope is admin. I hope you like this video. If so, please hit the like button and share it with your friends. And please do not subscribe. Please do not forget to subscribe our channel. Thanks for watching and have a good day. Happy learning.